this lesson, I'm going to tackle this bottom bun, the bottom patty, and I'm going to clean up these sauces in preparation to merge everything. What I've decided to do is to have these things be individual elements, but create a copy of them that's welded and texture both. I want the option of having a separate element so that I can simulate it, or whoever is going to use this asset can simulate dynamics with the fluids. So I'll give them the option of having these 4 elements separate. There is one thing that I appear to have missed as I was doing all the studying, and it's onions. The closer I look, I start to see a lot of things that are very clearly onions. They are somewhat translucent. Here's another one. This is a charred onion sitting on the cheese. I completely ignored that. There's another one here also hanging out the back. And I'm pretty sure that these patties were made with onions and pressed. So the onions are infused in. So some of these discolorations that you see that aren't brown are in fact onions. Like I really feel like this is one. And I'm sure this side has a lot of it. So I went and got some reference of burgers that have onions infused so I can have some reference to attempt these onions. I have 2 types that I have to create, some that are partially charred at the edges and some that are completely charred. So I got reference for everything, and it should be a fairly simple addition, and I have a plan on how to sculpt them. Okay, so the summary for this lesson is the onions, this patty, the bread, fix these sauces, and then in the next lesson I'll make a copy of these 4 elements, weld them together, sculpt them as one unified piece. And once these are welded and sculpted, all that's left is the fluid meshes, and I can move to UVing and texturing. Alright, so I am going to start scattering these onions in strategic places. I don't want too many of them, just a handful and what I'm seeing in the reference. So I'm going to mask from the cleanest shape I have, which is this cheese. I want a blocky shape, and I'll play with it as needed. So I will extract, that's a lot, so I'll extract at 0.005. That's about good. I'll accept it. And I will scale it down so it's more of a cubic shape, like that. And make sure it's as thin as an onion. And I will simplify it to just a simple blocked out shape. And solo it, make it feel like a cuboid. Just a quick block out. And now I'm going to start inserting it in strategic places where it'll be shaded to blend in. I'm going to put, I really don't want too many, I just want a little bit. I'm going to put this one maybe here. Move it out a bit. Pull it. I'll blend it in shortly. And I'm going to Alt move to create the one I'm actually seeing here. Is about there. sure it's wrapping around. It's a lot taller. Pull this side out a bit. It's melting. So I have one here, one there. Work this. Try to get another one on this side. Every time I feel like just one per viewing angle is about enough. I don't want it to overwhelm so much that it's very clear. Alright, now I'm going to get the main ones and go auto group, so each of them gets a group. I'm going to do the main ones I'm seeing in the reference, so I'll alt click there and control drag to get the one that's positioned on top of this cheese here. Inflate it a bit because so I can position it better. Some top here, and I'm going to take the snake hooks brush because it does a lot more deformation. I'm going to zero mesh it every time I move it so that it can resurface to the new shape and allow me to position it better. Okay, so that should be that one. Make sure and I do have to come in here and make sure that this sauce is interacting with it correctly. So I'll just start hinting at that. I'll deal with that later when it's time to get this sauce. I'll make sure I hint at it so it looks like it's in there. Okay, so that's the charred one up here. There appears to be another one down at the bottom. I'm going to grab this, go auto group again. And grab it. There seems to be another one over here with a different shape. It's pointing downward. Flake this one too just a little because it's deteriorating. Very charred. just for unification purposes, I will put some on the other side. Just wanted to not look like there's something here I don't want it to feel detached. So if there's onions over here, we definitely have to have some on the other side. I'm going to isolate these two. Go split hidden, so I can have these two separate. And then I'm just going to move them to the other side and position them in a different way in different areas. This one, I want to make sure it's interacting with the sauce properly at the places where it's connecting. So I'll just start some moundy detail. Just to get a little bit of cohesion. Okay, so it's going to be our the charred onions, and I do need to get some of these small ones on the bottom bun, so I'm going to grab this. Let me solo it, see how many there are. There's about 5 of them. I will duplicate the mesh and just move it down and then start positioning them individually. I'm going to, this bottom bun is not that exposed, so I'm not going to overdo it. I'm going to go delete hidden and then just focus on positioning that one, and I think I should be fine. Auto group. One more maybe over here, and that's it. That's it for the onion scatter. Blocked out shape. Now it's time to sculpt them. Alright, so that's the onions. This would be, rename onions, bottom patty. Onions, long charred, and onions, top patty. The next thing I'm going to do is start putting in the ridges that represent an onion that has been peeled down to this size. There's ridging on the outer surface, and this is mostly going to be describing the surface that is not charred. So that's why I want to put it in first, and then I'll start wearing away at the edges to get the charred part. So let me see what I'm working with first. Let me start here at the top, and I will divide and then solo, and I'll take the build up. I'm going to use the build up in the Damien standard because of how thin it is. I'm going to make sure back face masking is on, so I'll divide again. Let's start with the build up. I'm going to need a lot more than that. I'll just build up and gives it a much more natural feel. The other side really doesn't matter as much. take the Damian standard and pick some areas of it. Looks like I have to go to subdivision level, a good subdivision level, like 5. Zoom like that. Okay, I think we'll get it on the rest of them. Now I'm going to beat up their edges and start determining the part of it that's going to be completely burnt. I'm going to divide and start with my build-up brush. Make sure dynamic is off and start eating away at some of these edges. This is just some general detail that's telling me what's burnt. I'm going to try to break this silhouette. Counting on the noise to really help me here. Alright, so that's in here. Do the same. I'm going to put in more digs because burnt is really eaten away as opposed to build up. So I have to make sure I'm representing that well. I'm going to deal with these guys and give them just a little bit of information. These are the charred ones, so the whole thing is just burnt and unrecognizable. Just start with a little bit of information. Okay, so that's it for the charred pieces. With them, I'm going to resurface them starting with Dynamesh. So I'm going to take them and Dynamesh them. Do that. Delete lower. because I want them to take on topology that better matches their initial shape and lose their, that's not bad. I'll open this and go just a little higher. There we go. Yeah, it's good. Zoom out, and I'm going to turn them back into workable topology that I can step through. So I'm going to turn all these off, duplicate them, z-remesh them at maybe 1K. So okay, and I'll project the detail back. And that's fine. And I'll delete the Dynamesh. Alright, so the next step is to start noising these things. I'm going to come here, turn everybody back on, and take them out. And I'll start with the top one. And I'm going to select the area that I actually do want to receive this noise. So I will select all the burnt. Okay, so that's all these areas selected. Just to be safe, I'm going to group mask because I want to store that data only so I can go up a subdivision level and then reselect the area. Alright, so now I'm going to go to the noise function, invert first, then blur, mask a little, actually a lot, and a nice transition. And I might not have painted this as well. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to surface noise, start looking for a good setting. I'm not sure what's going to really be the best, so I'm going to start increasing strength, reducing scale. Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's really aggressive. Yeah, that looks really good. Let me see if I apply to mesh. Yeah, that's too much. And it's swelling it. I don't want that. Okay, that feels a lot better. Okay, so I had to grab the curve in the opposite direction. Sometimes I have to experiment with these settings. I'm going to store this setting so I can use it for the bottom and not have to go through this painstaking process. It's really tough though. Alright, I'll do it to this too. So I'll mask. Apply the same noise of 0.013 on 1, strength of minus 0.1594, and the curve of that. And apply to mesh. Okay, this one seems to have turned out a lot more better. And I'll get these guys with similar settings. I want to get the whole thing though. That's too much. 4 million is good for the noise. Um, 159-ish. Apply to mesh. Yeah, that's gonna have to do. The next step is to tie this chart into the final pieces a lot better. So I'm going to start with the top patty and get to that. I'm going to use the Danian standard. To make these forms make a little bit more sense, I'll also use and build up just to tie them in better. The overall piece. Surface detail like this too. Zoom out. That feels good. Leave it right here. Just better the partitions and emphasize certain dates. The rest. Make sure it just doesn't look fake. And go get the rest. And make sure this not so burnt part gets even more striations. There are some So now for these ones, I'm going to get a regular, my Alpha 8, or just do a color spray and do Alpha 8 and go behind them and just get some information here. It's not important, just some data and probably striations, not really matter, just something. Okay, so before I move to the charred ones, which they really need a specific type of detail that I'm going to get to, I'm going to do one more thing to these guys just to give them some other type of random detail. I'm going to use my weird Alpha 40 modified brush, also on color spray. So I'm going to bring them in. And just 2 of them, and that one. I'm going to see what they offer. Make sure they're subtracting. I want to hack in. That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. Let me see the other one. Yeah, this one feels a lot better. Have some cool surface detail. This is just some scratching I did in Photoshop. Alpha 40, which is this one. Alpha 40 right there, and I just took it and added some more shapes to it. I'll take them as is. Alright, so for these pieces, these chart pieces, this rounded detail, moundy detail is not enough to describe it, at least not for me, a burnt item. This is not enough. So I'm going to start by coating it with a wrinkles brush. In the past, it's done a really good job creating a burnt feel for me. So I'm going to go to drag rect and import a wrinkles brush that comes with ZBrush. That one right there. This really works well, creating a burnt feel. And I'm going to coat the surface with it. Increased intensity and make sure it's set to subtract. Just to get some initial information. This feels pretty long. Let me go on a lower subdivision level. Yeah, works better on a lower subdivision level. I just want it on some parts. I don't want to lose all the detail I put in. And this is just the beginning. It's giving me some lines I can trace over. And it comes with this like really deep line that you can use to decide what to do with the surface. Alright, so let me drag it. Let me change the direction of some of these. They all don't have to go in the same direction. I'm gonna do this one. Okay, so now I'm going to take the Damon standard now and use some of these lines it's giving me. Chart some pathways. Break up the surface. It does look a little too I'm gonna have to tone down some of the details, just a noisy surface, and I don't think that's valuable for a burn charred piece. Yeah. After this, I'm going to go in with I'm going to build up and break up some of this monotonous detail. It works very well from a distance, but up close it doesn't look as appealing. So some areas like that are not responding well. Smooth some of these areas. Yeah, it needs a lot of fixing. I'm gonna grab my build up and just start marrying some of these forms, tie them together so I have some type of medium range detail, medium scale detail that is different from this noisy result. This huge, these small details are now accompanied by larger masses. Yeah, that break it up some more. It's like one noisy piece with the same type of masses. And I'll just add some larger masses. That I suppose would have been areas that have less burn, so they're not so deteriorated. And make sure I'm creating these shapes that might be a little too bulby. And actually that works very well to using the trim dynamic to just clear some of that detail, excessive detailing. Using this view, also building. Yeah. And get the other side the same way. Be careful with the trim dynamic. Smooth. Larger masses. Larger masses. Get the trim dynamic. Do some clearing of the detail. Okay, that feels pretty charred. Okay, yeah, that feels pretty charred. So until further notice, these are done. As I work around them, I'll decide what else they need. It's time to process this bottom bun. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a duplicate of it. I just want to keep the original. And I'm going to start off with some really soft form building to create some partitions. I'm seeing a certain type of large, medium, and small detail that I think I can accomplish with a combination of tools. I'm not going to do too much work on it because eventually it's going to be merged with this and it's covered in a lot of sauce, and the sauce has to be processed too, and they have to be merged for me to take it to final. But the basic information I'm going to get it. So I'm going to divide it about twice, solo it, get my build up brush. I want it really light, so maybe like 2, and then we test it out. That might be too little. I'm gonna make sure I turn off dynamic mesh. Yeah, that's a little too light. I'll go to 4. Yeah, 4 might be good. I'm gonna create this like really light form. These like large partitions that qualify as, I suppose, secondary detail. Try to keep the shapes somewhat different. And I will respect what I'm seeing already and chart those paths. This is going to look something like that. Not too worried about blending them at the moment. Also try to go with more tubular forms. So like that. Really medium scale surface detail. I'm also go with these rosy buildups. They tend to marry well into each other and create some really nice underlying detail in the past that really also works. So I go with these tubular masses. Rosy forms, and then sometimes zigzags. Alright, so I'm going to give this entire piece that treatment, and then I'll come back so we can move to the next stage. Alright, so now that all this form building is done, all this cool rosy detail and moundy detail is done, it's time to noise it, right? So I'm going to go to a subdivision higher, and I have a specific noise setting that I tried out that I really like. So I'm going to go, I could probably add a layer, but I don't think it's necessary. I'll just duplicate the mesh and give it to delete these duplicates soon. So I'll go to surface, noise, and I'm going to go with a noise of 7 with a value here of 53. Okay, I'm going to apply to mesh. Okay, yeah, this is what I want. And now I'm going to go in and start sculpting these in very specific areas. These like mounds that I see all over the surface, like these bulby mounds. Some of it is in really soggy areas. I can see these bubbly mounds. It also feels like noise, but some of them are more emphasized, and sculpting them in will also push the mesh to have different intensities of detail. So like even here, this is really damaged, so I really have to eventually come back and mess it up even more here. But yeah, this bun has a lot of that like bulby and sometimes interesting data that's really standing out. So I want to try to put all that in by hand on top of the noise. All right. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make sure I'm putting it in areas that I'm going to benefit from, because I don't want to detail areas that are hidden, that are a little too hidden. So that are completely hidden behind the sauce. So I'm going to start here, increase my brush intensity. And start putting in this bulby information all around. Hopefully I don't have so much of it to do, because it's not that much of it that's exposed. Now down here, this is really obliterated again by the sauce. So I'm going to really go be a little bit more aggressive here, and then hopefully put another noise on top of it, or an alpha, to spray that region. And also these bulbs, I'm putting them, I'm not doing my own thing. I'm seeing, one of the reasons why I add the noise is because I wanted to tell me something interesting that I can emphasize. So I'm putting them in areas that the noise function has already pushed. I'm gonna try to get a lot here. I have to be careful not to have them all this relatively the same size. I have to play with some larger mounds in certain areas. these interesting pockets. I like to stay close to the crevices. Let me start varying the intensity so that I actually increase the intensity so I can control it with my pressure of the pen, so I get more prominent shapes. Make sure it's not all moundy detail. From here I have to start thinking about doing some more interesting things. Come back over it and to try to do some negatives too. I'm not make sure I'm not some of them are looking really good. I have to be careful. Okay. Move here. It's almost like a personality pass. All these buds and things. Okay, so I'm going to pause and get the whole piece. And let make you watch me do the same thing. All right, so that's a lot of interesting detail that's standing out in specific areas. All right, it's really cool. I like it. Next thing I'm going to do is start charting these really soft pathways or emphasizing these pathways that I'm seeing, these patterns with the Damon standard, very light. Right, so like, for instance, if I'm gonna make sure it's not overwhelming, but they have to be complete pathways. So terminate into logical areas. Yeah, that also really helps stand out. This one will have a lot more. It's very important to follow what the noise is already. Let's create a lot more cohesion, but you do have to make sure you terminate them correctly. Can't just be lines that just stop in the middle of stuff. This one right there just stops. So connect to something. Have to be careful though, I feel like this might have been a little too much. I need to try to drown it out a bit with form. I'll take that shape and be a lot more careful. And try to not make them so charty. I think that was a bad idea. I'm gonna use them to emphasize the mounds. In certain areas. Help to create a lot more interesting data. Yeah, I actually don't like this one at all, so I'm going to draw most of it out. Yeah, it shouldn't be long pathways, long veiny pathways. It should emphasize the mounds that are already there, giving them varied intensities. I thought the pathways would work. I tried it. I think that works if it comes before all this noising to define stuff, to define large forms. This is good. This helps to break it up so they don't all feel like they have the same intensity. emphasize some of those folds and creases that I established in the previous lesson. This definitely needs its intensity broken up. The last thing I do is also going to help really break up. I'll use a contrast feature, either the brush or in deformation. It's looking good. Alright, so I'm gonna pause the video, or sorry, just do as I'm doing, just speed through this part because I don't want to make you watch the entire thing. Alright, so that's it with the intensifying with the Damon standard. The last thing I'm going to do before I leave this mesh in preparation for merging with this sauce is add some pores, right? Because when I look really close, I see really pore-like detail, and I have a brush that I really like that I tested out. It's SW Pores 5. That way, it's SW Pores 5, and it's in the ZBrush Pixelogic library. Applied in a specific way. The first thing I want to do is make sure I turn on lazy mouse with it. I'm on the standard brush and I want color spray. Let me subdivide this mesh. First I'll duplicate and then I'll subdivide it to the highest I want it to be. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is store a morph target because I want to be able to erase this. So I'll store a morph target. But if you look at the brush and I just apply it as is, it's fairly intense. Actually, no, it's perfect. I think I was applying it at too high of an intensity, but what I would have done is I would have gone to alpha and I blurred the alpha about a bit because I was using too high of an intensity. Right, so but it looks really good. So at 16 intensity, I'm going to go through here and apply it at different sizes. Turn off dynamic. Some of them will be double coats. It's fine. As long as I can come back in here and use my morph brush to control what's happening. To try to minimize the double coats. So it's very busy. So I'm going to grab my morph brush at a pretty low intensity and start toning it down in certain areas to vary its intensity, because I don't want it to be the same everywhere, or for it to be everywhere. Alright, so that's as far as I'm willing to go before the merge. So I'm going to add a layer, store a layer, grab a very, like a color spray. I'll grab one of these, I think it's Alpha 8. And I'm going to mask various regions. Invert the mask, deformation contrast of about 30, so it just breaks up the detail on the surface even more. Alright, so it's time to process this bottom patty. I'm going to take a similar approach to what I did on the top here, but with a little less processing. There are some steps that I'm going to skip that I think may have been redundant, but just a few. I feel like it's a solid workflow, so I'm going to rely on it again. I'm only going to do one, and then I'm going to pause the video or speed through the rest of them so that you don't have to watch me do the exact same process. So I'm going to focus on the one that is most exposed, this one. And these chunks are larger, there are 4 chunks. So let me get started. With the top chunk, I actually went in there and did some additional molding before I started using nanomesh, and I don't think it's necessary for this step because I'm going to be sculpting the bottom bulbous part after I do nanomesh with about the same techniques that I use at the beginning to craft the bulby shapes. So I feel like that's a step that can be skipped, so I can focus on doing it after the nanomesh is in. I'm going to take this, bring it out here so I can process it, and then I'm going to duplicate it and go down a few subdivision levels to about there. This should be good. I will delete lower, delete higher, and that's a good amount. Alright, so now that I've gotten this piece, it's time to create my nanomesh brush. Unfortunately, I do not do a lot of saving of that brush every time I create it, so I have to keep creating it. It's really simple, so I'm going to frame it. I'm going to Z-remesh at 5K just to lose the pole. It's something that will produce good results when noised. Then I will go create insert brush, new, and then I'll go create nanomesh brush. Okay. And I'll go back to my patty, the simplified version of it. And I'm going to click and drag on the surface, hold down shift, and that produces nanomesh on the entire surface. And now I can go into the nanomesh menu, increase size, increase the variance of length, width, and height. Let me zoom out. This time I'm going to take this offset version. I really like when they're really offset like this. Produces some really gutty information. And I think I might also keep the density as is. The next step is to duplicate this. I'll call this my bottom chunk 1 nano. I will duplicate it. Always good to keep a duplicate so I can come back and fix any mistakes. And then I'm going to go to geometry and go convert BPR to geo. That's a lot of pieces. And then I'm going to isolate and go split hidden. So that's done. And I don't need this either. So I'll go split hidden. And these two pieces are not needed anymore, so I'll just go delete, delete. And so I have my nano, generated nano. And that mesh I used for my nano mesh was pretty dense, so you have to be careful. Maybe next time I'll go like a 1K or 2K. But the next step is to noise this thing. So I'm going to, actually the first thing I want to do is go all low, because I want to make sure I turn off subdivisions for all the other assets that I've been sculpting, because this thing is starting to slow down. But I will crank it back up for my chunk here, because I need this. And the next step is to noise this thing. So I'm going to go surface, turn off polyframe. Yeah, that's a lot. Should have been a lot more careful. That's pretty dense. Noise, edit. I'm looking for something in the vicinity of 0.01. That's about what I used the other time. And 0.1. Definitely want to go like that. Okay. Apply to mesh. Let me see what another application does. I'll go noise, apply to mesh. Alright, that's pretty gutty. I'm trying another approach. I like to use slightly different settings so everything doesn't look the same. And a lot of this is going to be resculpted. I particularly like it for the burnt area, the charred area. These little chunks feel good up there. So I'm going to put this in a folder along with the noise surface. And there is one more thing that I skipped, which I do have to do. So I'm going to take the original chunk, divide it, solo it, and make sure I noise it just a little bit so it has detail to receive what I'm doing. So I'm going to go surface noise. Pretty good, but I think I want one is a 0.14ish and strength of 0.007. No, 0.14 is what I meant. Yeah, something like that. And apply to mesh. Have enough subdivision levels. Okay, that feels good. Alright, go to layers, go to subtool. You can try a whole bunch of different other settings too. Just this experiment. You always stumble across something that either works for what you're doing or works for a different ingredient type, and you can store it and use it later. So now that I have this, I'm going to merge the folder. Okay, so that's the final result. That's pretty rich. Okay, so I'm gonna go easy with the Dynamesh. That's the next step. So I'm gonna open this because I know I'm gonna need a lot of geometry, and since this is also a bigger chunk, I'm going to go in the 14K region and go Dynamesh. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. Alright, so this is a nice starting point. Looks a little bit like a candy, but the sculpting will change its fate. Alright, so now that I have this piece, now I'm going to start fleshing out the bulby base. Right, because the base is bulby, but I'm going to do some smoothing initially. So I'm going to tone down the detail at the bottom half, because I know the top is more charred. And I know I'm about to put some bulbier detail on this bottom half. Go solo. Grab my build up and start emphasizing the shapes that were kind of already over there. So this is a slightly bit of a different approach from what I did up top. So I'm going to keep up with this bulby massing. No. Make sure I select this alpha 6. I always have to remind myself to do that with build up. So I need that. Really bulby detail. For the top ones, I did a nice little cleanup with if you remember, with build up and Damien standard. And for this one, I completely skipped that step for this one. Took the surface as is, noised it, and just jumped straight in with the nano mesh. A lot of tubular massing, but it has to be accompanied by all these spiraling masses. So now, to make sure the transition is somewhat believable, the transition is a bit too harsh. make sure this onion is also on. Alright, now to create some more intense partitions, I'm going to get my Damien standard brush, and I'm going to keep all this type of detail to the outskirts, and I'm going to start fleshing out some pathways, respecting the detail that has already been placed in here. There's some initial partitioning and intensifying of detail before I bring that Alpha 16 brush in here to break up the top. Try and go like really organic strokes. So that means really wobbly. But there can also be some like straight lines because these things end up with so many different types of shapes. Some of them look machine made and some of them it's more organic, but like a straight line can sometimes work. Just don't want to overdo it. Good partitioning. Come over here and make some of these shapes a lot larger. There really should be some ones in there that are just big enough. It feels like a lot of the same sizing. So it's a little bit more interesting. Okay, now I'm going to get my Alpha 16 brush here and break up this weird candy feel up here. So I'm going to go drag rect and import my burn brush Alpha 16. That one right there that I use on the top patty. Actually, this is a good time to generate a final mesh. Generate a final mesh and project, and even that might reduce the amount of chocolatey feel that this has. So I'm going to hide everything on the stage. And I'm going to duplicate this final mesh, solo, and remesh at 5K should be good. I will more than likely take a higher subdivision level that is more dense and better approximates the final mesh. So I'm going to start dividing and projecting. So I'll divide, project, starts pulling, divide, project. And take a look, divide, project. Okay, this is a good pull. I'll try one more, divide and project. Alright, so that's it. Store morph target. So I can play with this. And add a layer. And start dragging this burn alpha at somewhat of a higher intensity. Easy add. Intensity. Okay. Let me divide one more time. So 8 million. Yeah, that's a lot better. And make sure my morph target is still on here. Let me delete that, store it again, and add a layer. A little bit more intense. Okay. That might be a little too intense. Let me tone it down. This thing will have to be cleaned up. So I'm gonna start going in here and cleaning up these, making sure to understand that the top needs to be chippier, more burnt than the bulbous bottom. Break up this chippy detail. It looks too candy-like. charting these pathways to really break the surface up. Alright, so I'm going to speed this up as I use Damien standard to create pathways and break up the intensity. Shave away with trim dynamic to produce a burnt like feel, and then use build up to lose some of the monotonous detail and add some new shapes all over the place so they all don't look the same. Alright, so I went through and did a little bit more cleanup, and for the top and bottom, which I'm not too worried about, I just went in there and did some build up to break up that chippy feel. It's mostly burnt, singed, so it can stay like that, and this is my focus though. What I'm going to do now is break up the intensities because it still looks really, really similar, like a lot of the same shapes up top and at bottom. I'm going to do that two ways. First, I'm going to mask like these random regions over there. Might as well do it to the whole piece. And do an aggressive contrast. So I'll go deformation and maybe like a contrast of 50. Okay. And then that does a little bit of breakup. And for the top, I want some specific type of noising to help drown some of it out, not all of it. Just when I say top, I should have said the charred part. For the charred part, I want some unique noising to drown out. Okay. So it should be about good, and I'm going to invert it and blur the mask so that it's a nice transition. And I'm going to go to surface, noise, to reduce the scale, increase the strength, and then take it in the negative to add a different type of information. Yeah, like that. Okay. Okay, I get that very burger feel, which I like, but it has more than likely obliterated the mesh. I'll take a good look at the mesh to see what has happened to it. As I go down, I'm going to make sure there's no aggressive interpenetration. Okay, so I get that really burger-like effect, like really small chunks of like grounded beef feel. So I'll take that, come in here and continue finessing these shapes. Adding more personality. This bottom region needs to be really wholesome, minimal chippy detail. A lot more crescent shapes. I'm gonna go through, pause this, and do the cleanup with Damien and build up, and I'll come back so we can continue. To do some further breaking up, I'm going to allow some of these larger crescent shapes to chart these pathways with the build-up, up, through. Is something different other than all circular crescent shapes that I'm doing. So I'm gonna grab like a big shape like this and then just let it chart a pathway, a more like very stringy pathway up. And it helps to really break it up in a nice way. So I'll take like maybe something like this, really massy, and let it go all the way up, charting a path like that, and stopping over there. Yeah. In an area like this where it's also a little too aggressive, go more like a zigzaggy pattern. All this to really break it up and give it that randomized feel that burnt beef has. Chop it up. So that's a lot of work for this guy. One thing I want to do to vary the intensity of these bottom bulby forms is do a mixture of contrast and noise. So I'm going to mask some of this bottom bulby area, not all of it. Like that. So I'm going to invert that, go with a very aggressive contrast, deformation contrast of maybe like 30. Maybe more than that, 50. Okay, that's very intense. And then I'm going to take some of it, okay, and just apply just a regular noise also to some parts of this bottom side. So I'm going to surface noise, edit, not this type, just regular noise. Crank down the strength. I don't want it too strong. Crank down the scale. Go back to mesh. Yeah, just additional breakup, and that should be it. So a mixture of contrast and noise in varied regions, and that should work. And try some of this also polishing with like chippy detail up here. I always have to remind myself this is burnt meat up here. So a little bit of flattening of those forms. Not too much. Alright, let me look at it with everything else. Yeah, very broken up, different type of information. Definitely don't want all the meat to look the same as you're looking at the top and the bottom, so this is good. I can't wait to apply the same formula to the other side, so I'm going to try to come up with something that holds a lot more of these forms. You really got obliterated here. A lot of these forms got leveled. When I'm looking at it as a whole with all this stuff done, I might make some changes here. Alright, I'm going to pause the video, do the same thing to the other sides, and I'll come back and talk about any changes I did so we can take a look at this as a collective. Alright, so before I actually move on, there's one thing I really want to try out. these masses at the bottom, I do want there to be some individual ones that are extremely large, but I don't want to go messing up all the contrast and noise detail I got in there. So I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to go down about 2 subdivision levels, but I'm going to make them a lot more unified, like big, massier. I just pick a handful of them like that, and maybe in a region like this. I don't want it everywhere, just a little bit massive. This will keep all the detail that I've done on the high subdivision level, and I don't want them to be all evenly spaced out. So big, massier bits of information. And maybe I could do another one here. Yeah, right, so like that, not too much. Don't want to obliterate all this hard work. I'm actually going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to take some of these very similar sizes, come down a few subdivision levels, and on a layer, start to create some more unified, do some more unification, creating larger shapes. So looking at the reference, it feels just too chippy. It still feels like candy up there. So just wiring some, welding some of these together on a lower subdivision level. Should suffice, but now I feel the need to add some more smaller scale noise on this top area, just to help differentiate it a little bit more from the bottom. I'm going to go to the high subdivision level. I'll go solo and mask out this entire top region here. It has all this chippy detail. Let me see the reference go really close. It's a lot of like small scale noise detail. A little bit more aggressive than that. Full scale. Maybe a slight bit more stronger. Yeah, that does add that. Yeah, that feels pretty good. Alright, so I got the nano mesh for the rest of the chunks done. I'm going to go over a summarized version of the workflow. So I'll be really speeding through. I just want to narrow down the workflow to a handful of steps, because even here I realized I could cut down the number of steps. So it's improved from this one to here. But here there was somewhat of a undesired look at the beginning, and it eventually got to where it is right now. I'm going to try to summarize the steps here. I soften with the smooth brush the lower portion of it, because I know that those are the bulbier forms. They're not the burnt forms. So there's a lot of bulby forms here. There's from our reference. It's the part of the patty that isn't singed on the grill. Right. So smooth the lower half like that. I'll do it here too. Smooth the lower half in preparation for the bulby forms. I used relatively the same nano mesh settings, but there were some differences in the size of the nano meshes. So that's good because it breaks things up. Solo. Okay. Looks like I'm gonna just smooth that. Base. A lot of this is probably hidden in cheese. So, alright. So once that bottom half is smoothed out pretty well, the next step is to go in here, take my build-up brush, and on this Dynamesh piece, start building up the bulby forms at the base. So you've already seen me do this. I'm gonna speed through this as I get it done for all three of them. All the bulby partitions are now done at the bottom half. Right, so the next thing is to take the Damian standard and start creating partitions that chart paths that are sort of echoing themselves to us, and also to intensify some of these crevices that have been established at the bulby partitions phase. Right, so this helps to break it up a bit. It helps to break up the monotony, and it's one of the many steps that is used to break up how similar the crevice intensities are. So I'm going to pause and also race through this. Now that the partitions are done and we're closer to what the final mesh is going to look like, now it's time to get our final topology and project what we have onto it. So I will duplicate B, solo it, it's already soloed, and Dynamesh it, Z-remesh it at 5K. Alright, so now that we have it, it's time to project the data onto it. I'm going to turn everything off. Leave those two meshes on. So I can turn off color, divide and project, divide, project, until you feel like you've gotten enough information. I think for me that's one more. And project at 2 million. Alright, so now that I've gotten that, I'm going to get the other two done and I'll be back for the next step. Alright, so all the resurfacing is done. At this stage, what I was doing was using my Alpha 16 brush, but I'm going to skip it this time around because I feel like a lot of the things I'm doing to this top area is deforming it aggressively, and that Alpha 16 is ultimately just really drowned out in the final noise that I do. So I'm going to skip that step and go straight to masking part of most of this top area. Do like a really randomized mask. Try to keep it mostly at the top area. Blur mask. And apply the surface noise that is going to give me the bulby burger feel. I'm going to go noise, and it's about a value of 0.2. Inset like that, and about 0.01. To mesh, yeah, and then it gets this really burgery effect. Alright, so I'm going to apply it to the other two and I will be back. Alright, so now that that stage is done and I've managed to do the swelling, I'm going to apply very small scale noise, and I only want to apply it once to this entire surface and play around to get different results with the morph brush to get varied results. So this is just a way to minimize the amount of distortion that the mesh is going through as I try to achieve a believable result. I'm going to go to a layer, add a layer, and just go to noise edit. Go with a very small scale noise, 0.02 is what I think I did. And then I think there, it's fairly strong. I think it was 0.01, like that. But I'm supposed to be storing a morph target, so I store a morph target, and I go to surface noise, apply to mesh. Okay, so now I have noise all over it, and I can now grab my morph brush and start toning down the noise, specifically in the lower extremities and part of the upper extremities. Okay. This gets us to similar result as above, a lot faster. Alright, let me do the same for the rest, and I'll come back and show you the steps I use. All of them have been noised. It's time for the final procedural effects that I'm going to apply, and that's contrast. So I'm going to solo chunk B, and the contrast was being applied with a mask. Just invert, blur. I'll apply contrast of say 50. Yeah, like that. Very aggressive. And it should break it, make it really strong. And that's the last procedural thing I'm going to do. So I'm going to do it to the rest of them, and when I come back, the rest of the faces are by hand. All that is done, and now the last and final step is hand sculpting. Some of my onions are being penetrated, so I'm going to move them out the way. Alright, so now it's time to take the build-up brush and take each piece, go on a lower subdivision level so I don't obliterate the noise detail that I've done, and start unifying some of these pieces. Right. Charting not so much crescent shapes, but pathways, like stringy pathways, which you see with burger meat reference. We want to try to focus on the areas that are visible. You've seen me do this before. It's just a nice unification process. It helps to create medium scale detail. And it's important that you do it in a low subdivision level. If you do it on 6, then all the noising we did will be erased by the brushwork. So. And I'll take the opportunity to make some of these also larger scale detail at the bottom here, because that was another thing that was important to do. Alright, so I'm going to go through and do that and come back for about 1 or 2 more steps. The stringy pathways are working, and I was going to go over top of it and use the trim dynamic to shave off some of these burnt areas, but I don't think it's necessary for now. Maybe if I take a look at it a little longer, I might realize that I do want to do that, but I think this is fine. This works as is. So I'm going to move on to the final part of this lesson, and that's making sure that these sauces are ready for the merge that I'm going to do in the next lesson. So what that means is that they have to interact with the patties they're on properly. And it also has some areas that need some form building. I'm going to start with this top sauce and clean that up. As I said, what I'm interested in is making sure it interacts with the things around it correctly, but I'm also going to be fleshing out some of the forms that I want to see on it. With this cheese, I want to make sure that it remains very plain without too much noisy detail, because it's important to help create detail contrast in this entire piece, right? Everything around it is so detailed, and the other sauce I've established that it's going to have some grittiness to it, because I see some grittiness when I go up close. So the cheese is the only thing that's going to break up the extensive detail. I'm going to divide it, and I will resurface it once I feel like I've gotten a final shape. Before I start making it interact, I am fixing this little penetration issue. Working these edges. And create these small partitions in certain areas. But just really, for the most part, I'll try to be very careful about how much information it's going to receive. So this area where it's touching the burger, I want to see some more interactivity with the forms. I'm also going to try to use the move tool to accomplish that. I want more tubular masses than anything over there. Focus here first, and I'll go get the top where it collides with the top patty. When I create the copy that's going to be merged, it's going to be so easy to really blend it in. So I won't be going too far. I just want a nice clean connection, because this version is also going to be available for this asset. So it needs to be clean enough. Alright, so I'm just using the build up brush to just get these edges to feel like they're connected. I already did this. You can see I can get away with a lot of tubular massing when it comes to this. When it comes back here, I do have to consider how it's interacting with this bottom sauce. So I'm going to touch up this bottom sauce just a little bit, but I'll get to it soon. It's not time to deal with it yet, but just because it's so close here, I'm going to deal with it. And I think when I get to all the way around, there's another interaction that I need to be paying attention to. Actually, I might go and get it now because it's very important and it's in the front. So here, I seem to have gotten wrong how these two are interacting. This bottom sauce here is really high. So it's about that much. There's that much interaction. So I'll get that in. Alright, I'm going to speed through this as I go around. I'm going to be basically doing the same thing, and then sometimes you see me build some form that helps it to transition in better. I'll do more of that after I've dealt with these connections, but I'm starting to hint at that right now. I need to use my Damien standard to also create some networks, which I'm seeing in the reference. Grid networks that then can become partitions. This is a good place to make sure that this is interacting properly. To do like some flowy, cheesy masses over there. Try to create some different shapes. It's a little bit of fixing and marrying at the same time. Marrying forms and fixing. I'll get to its interaction with the top patty soon. Alright, so I'm going to speed this up so I can get to its interaction with the top. before I go to that top to get the blending with the top patty, I want to emphasize something that's really important here. It's like, so this really, the shape, and I'll come back and get it some more, but just emphasize it. Alright, and then head up there to do the blending. Now here, I want to first pull out a bit. Actually, I think the building is the way to go, like this. Vertical building. Yeah. Charting a horizontal one like that really doesn't work too well. It can, but it feels less organic. I want to increase the strength. Yeah, that feels good. Alright, I'll keep going all the way around. Making sure to outline. The major intrusions. You have to constantly zoom out and take a look at it because it doesn't look too good as far as the blending. To let some of it ride really high to connect in a more interesting way. To go into some of those crevices. And take a look at it from the top to make sure it's making sense and blending well into the masses underneath. So So now that you've seen what I'm going to be mostly doing, I'm going to speed it up. Alright, now that I'm done merging the cheese with everything around it, I'm going to move on to the sauce. But before I do that, I'm going to resurface this cheese because the topology is not evenly spaced out. So I'm going to keep a copy of this bottom cheese. I'm going to put these patties back into their folder. And turn everything around off, duplicate this, and resurface it at 5K. I hit the wrong button. Just want to resurface it at 5K. Alright, now that I have even topology, I'm going to project the data back. So I'll divide, project, divide, project, up to see if I've gotten a good amount of information. And it looks like I have, but I'll go one more. Project. Okay. So I can delete this. Alright. So I'm going to repeat this entire thing for the bottom sauce. I'm going to speed through it all. I'm just focused on the connection it's making with everything around it. So I'll make sure that connection is clean. I'm not worried about this connection yet. I'm gonna go and design these open spaces after the connections are done. So I'm gonna speed this through this connection so I can come back so we can design the surfaces. This one has to receive a noise just like this one. So it's very clear that it's the same ingredient. Alright, so I was a lot more aggressive with this mesh because I know I'm going to be doing this to it. But with this one, if you notice, I was really careful. I don't want too many crazy forms. And initially I was going to do some damp standard work, but I'm not going to do that because I do want it to feel really silky smooth. And if there's any form, it should be built up with the build up. I don't want to make it too rough of a mesh. If it gets any noise data, it'll come at the texturing stage. Right, I'll use some shading techniques on the albedo map to brush strokes. But I will take the brush strokes in some of the areas that they are, like here. I think that will make for a nice result in there too. Get a few more of these like teardrop. Shapes. Because they look pretty nice. Alright, in the spirit of not overdoing it, I'm going to move on to the bottom sauce. Okay, so it's time to do the bottom. I have to get the noise on this, make it look just like that. For that, I applied a default first, and then I masked some regions and applied a unique noise setting. Here, I'm not going to do that. I want it to be too busy. Well, I'm going to do something very similar, but I will mask first and then split the noise between two regions. So I'll grab my color spray and alpha 8, and definitely want to be higher. 3 million polygons is good, but I'll go for 12 million. Yeah. And spray alpha 8. Make sure. Most of the surface. Try this with layers. I'll apply a default, so a little noise. Let me look for, I guess just a larger scale, slightly larger. Apply to mesh. And I think that should be enough, and then I'll invert something close to what I did. Top, it was 1.76. I stored the information from that video, and I'm looking at it on the side, so I'm not just guessing. And dig in. Okay, and apply to mesh. That is too swollen, so I don't want that. I'm going to go with significantly smaller scale. That is too swollen, so I'll bring the scale down, increase the strength. Take the scale back up just slightly and try to change the curve a bit. Yeah, it looks fairly close. What I'm going to do is solo it and contrast it a bit just so it all doesn't look the same. Varied contrast. To deformation, contrast, and use like a 40. Okay, from that. breaks up the detail a bit. Let me turn off its color. It looks like the color is on. Just so I can some type of contrast to see how it looks. Alright, this is gonna have to do. Yeah, so that's it. In the next lesson, I'm going to merge these two and start sculpting the detail that transitions them and the blending to make sure that the bread can show through, and it's just going to have to look really unified. This separate piece thing is just not going to cut it, so it's going to be a lot of sculpting done to make it work. And the same is going to be done with the cheese and the burgers, but with them it's a pretty clean transition, so I'm not really worried about how hard it's going to be to sculpt transitions. But for this, there's definitely going to be a lot of work to do to just make it look cohesive.